The millennials probably don't like the label that they were given in their youth because they're not that person anymore.
For roughly 20 years, it's been nothing but articles about how millennials are terrible. Millennials are killing this industry, this tradition. Millennials don't want to work. Millennials feel entitled, this, that, and the other. And it's just become, I think, a lazy term.
No one wants to call themselves a millennial.
Hi, I'm Adam Casey, cartoonist, graphic designer. I was born in 1982, so technically a millennial, but I think of myself more as an Xennial, commonality between late Gen X and early millennial than there is core millennial commonality there.
Thanks for having me. Born in 81. I would like to call the 81 millennial Gen X cuspers the Molexer, which I think is obvious. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to spread this and make this viral on the internet. It's obviously should be Molexer. That way the millennial Gen Z cusper can be the Xennial spelt with a Z. I feel like that's a layup. That's a damn layup. I had the ultimate cusper experience because my parents were hippies. That's how I got the name Narottama. Moved around like gypsies from my first 9 years in life. Complete nomad experience. And then almost as like, almost as an apology for that, the next 9 years in my teenage years, they raised me with a lot of coddling and little discipline, like a millennial. So I had both experiences. And by the way, not a good way to raise a kid. All kinds of problems there.
And you said in your teenage years. So that's the thing. Paul and Phil, they've been on the show, and they were also born in 81. We've all said how, like, our first couple years were pretty loose. Like, we experienced the rusty playground equipment. But something about, like, once 1992 hit, we had to suddenly wear the bicycle helmets. We saw all the playground equipment transition. The parents started to get strict on us, all just like that. Like the world tightened.
We got a mix of both childhoods.
Jazz Andrews was born in 1988. That would theoretically make me, like, I guess at this point, or millennial, but I've never really identified with the label, especially since my parents were both over 40 when they had me, and they raised me with kind of that silent generation, the generation before the boomers style of wanting to have kids. I was always out in, like, playing in the creek, getting up to my ankles or into my knees in water, or doing something outside for, like, the first several years of my life until the internet hit, and then I was right in front of the internet when it came about. So that was my kind of, like, experience of, like, I had, like, the go outdoor and don't come back till it's dinner time kind of thing, or even sundown. And then after that, it transitioned into I'm at home, but I'm always in front of the computer kind of thing.
And this episode's for you. This is all about you, 1988. Yeah.
Oh God.
Well, we'll get back to that. All right, Amy.
Well, I'm not a millennial. I'm like, I feel like, remember the Sesame Street song with one of these things doesn't belong here, with the boxes? Yeah, I'm the one that doesn't belong here. But I consider myself to be a Joneser. I was born on the cusp of boomers and Generation X. I do have children that are Zers. My oldest one is a cusper on the millennial and Gen Z side, which I guess is why I'm here. So, yeah.
And we need a female voice. There you go. We'll just
and I'm the token chick.
Yes. You keep, and also the awkward silence. You know how to keep that, going.
I know how to talk. Yeah. I do that very well.
Tommy.
I'm right in the heart of the millennial generation, born in 1988. So I'm not anywhere near either cusp on either end, and so I'm like, there's not many people. There's not many arguments I could make for how I would not be considered a millennial.
So Chaz, you talked about like how you went outside and you probably drunk from the rusty water hose and all that, stuff that Gen X like to brag about. How
I was
abused
playing
it.
on the old playground equipment that was there since the 1950s, and
Right.
then
You almost died.
the
Got your
year
butt beat.
after
Yeah.
the year after I started, when I was in first grade, all of a sudden they switched it over on us.
The reason why I said this is all about you. So TikTok lately is getting into the generational game. We all know TikTok is like a haven for Gen Z, and lately they're like trash talking millennials. Millennials have been trash talked, from like the above generations, boomers and Xers, and now they're getting it from the Generation Z. So side parts and all that. I didn't even know that was an issue. So there's a whole bunch of videos going around from cohorts born between 86 and 94. That's 1986 and 94. Those are core millennial dates. And they're going around saying that they're too old school for new school, too new school for old school, got their butts whipped, and how they remember cassette tapes, videotapes, didn't get cell phones into their teenage years, and they went outside. And basically, that's the same thing that like the Xennials brag about, the 81ers, the early 80s babies. That's what we say. And it's really dawned on me that there's definitely a shared experience between the 80s and the 90s babies. I see it. But no one wants to call themselves a millennial. Why is that? That's what I think. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's because for roughly 20 years, it's been nothing but articles about how millennials are terrible. Millennials are killing this industry, this tradition. Millennials don't want to work. Millennials feel entitled, this, that, and the other. And it's just become, I think, a lazy term for especially journalism, which is sad, but just in society as a whole. And really, I think the problem comes from there's no term for somebody who's graduated high school, but is not yet settled down, not yet married, not yet have kids, that sort of thing, like not yet have a house, that sort of thing like that.
Young adult.
Well, young adult is misleading because, especially for the terms from literature, young adult fiction is designed for roughly 14 to maybe 19 or so, which we have the term teenager. And, we have tweens for, 9, 10, 11, 12, and we have senior citizen, but there's no real term for, hey, I'm still figuring out my life. I may still be living at home. I'm maybe in my first apartment. I may be on my first, maybe second job in my career path. I may have changed my career path. So it's a very amorphous term that is derided from the outside. So it makes perfect sense that nobody wanted to be called, this black mark. No one wants that on them. So I think that's really the problem, is that the concept of millennial has basically been for 20 years somebody out of college, don't have their life together, when honestly we're pushing 40 and a lot of us don't have ours together. But I think that's why millennials are rejecting the term, because it's just the stereotype and the stain of it all.
And with the core not calling themselves millennial, who are millennials now? Like, 1990? Is that, or 1995? What's a millennial? What are the boundaries?
Yeah, I think that's a little misleading too. I think also I'm also sort of wondering if that TikTok didn't start out as a joke, because I can't find the source. You go to people who do the sound, and you can't find the original tweet.
That's true.
Or the original TikTok, and it makes me think it started out as kind of a joke, and now it's become real for a lot of people. Yeah. So I don't know what exactly the origins of it are. But
the joke ran away with itself and became reality.
Right.
Well,
It's like all transitional. It seems like a transitional generation. One leg in an analog era, one leg in a digital era. But that's the definition of Xennial right there. And that's also how Pew Research defines millennial. So.
Well, I want to say regarding Adam's comment, okay, yeah, it's a hateful world. It's just a hateful world. And all the generations, pick at each other, whatever. I guess that's what we do now. But when the Xers didn't really like being called slackers either when they were 40, and they were still being pegged with that. So, you know, I think that it's really more of an issue of the millennials probably don't like the label that they were given in their youth because they're not that person anymore. And, you know, generations grow up. You can't, I know that I don't act exactly this. I'm basically not the same person at 55 that I was at 20. And I think that's what it boils down to. I think they're rejecting the labels of their youth because it doesn't fit them anymore, but that doesn't mean that they're still not a millennial. They're just millennials are older.
Just middle-aged millennials.
Right, right.
The name itself just means somebody that came of age during a new millennium. It's like, it's an innocent name. I mean, it was given to us by Strauss and Howe. And they have their dates. Their dates run from 1982 to 2004, which is laughable.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
Yeah,
well, and just to sort of to spell out why I think exactly there's the Xennial or Molexer, which I really like. Thing is that because that's such a broad spectrum there. Because I mean, if you're born in 81, 82, then I mean those like the big cultural events matter more to you. Like you know about, I mean, half of those dates are people born after the fall of the Berlin Wall. You know, they're born, you know, after Clinton did. You know, they're children when 9/11 happens, and so there's a big cultural difference between those first earlier ones. Millennials like me, I think up to about 1984, and then the core millennial stuff comes in, you know what I mean? Because if you're young enough, then you know the death of Kurt Cobain and Biggie and Tupac, that means something to you. The Clinton impeachment thing was something you maybe could or could not learn about in school, depending upon your age. But also, I think there's a little bit of fold in from those people born in like 78, 79, 80 who kind of missed out on the big core 90s kind of Gen X stuff. They missed out on like alternative and grunge. You know, by the time they're able to drive, grunge is kind of over. There's no grunge shows to go to anymore. So they kind of miss, I mean, granted, they obviously enjoy the music and stuff like that, but they don't get the full experience as a core sort of Gen Xer there of the late 80s into the mid 90s there. So I do think that there is a little bit of a different just experience for people born roughly 78 to 84.
I regret that Darius isn't with us. Darius and Cole Young, our co-hosts, they were born 1994. And so they could definitely speak for what's becoming the cusp on the other side, if they're really a cusp or not. You said, Adam, you talked about the young adult years being like just not being well defined. And I know back in 2008 when Obama was elected, the big thing was how the youth vote pushed him into office. And they defined that as 18 to 27, which would include, in 2008, which would include 81ers. And then Pew Research, I'm just letting people know the dates, the definers. Pew Research, they like to say millennial, somebody who was between 5 and I think 20 when 9/11 happened.
And that's a completely different experience. You know what I mean? Because if you're in your late teens, you're worried about your cousin or older sibling who lives in New York or DC, whereas in your middle school, maybe they tell you what's happened, most likely they don't. And if you're, a kid, in elementary school, it's probably nothing. You probably just go home and find out about it after the end of the day. So that's I think is one of the biggest cultural experiences of a millennial. And I think it definitely means something different to people who were older at that time than it was, people who are younger or the core demographic, being able to fully understand it and contemplate what the changes thereof means, what happened after 9/11, be able to process like, okay, whoa, Patriot Act kind of stuff, threatening, war with Afghanistan, the sort of things like that. That's a different, I think, cultural experience than the younger end of that. It's completely different.
I wanted to talk about those milestone events because I think that's important and I think that's key to breaking you know, the breaks between different generations. And first, let me say that, okay, I have known Ryan and Chaz for over a decade now, and we've been buddies for a long time. And I actually learned most everything I know about the Millennials from my friendship with them. And so we've been talking about the Millennials and generations and, you know, for a very long time. And so we just assumed for you know, years that my oldest, who was born in 1998, and my youngest, that was born in 2003, were just millennials, although the one born in 2003 might be at the end of the line. But, you know, I started thinking about, and I would actually ask my kids, what is your earliest memory of an event, you know, not outside of family, you know, would something, a national world event. And even with my oldest, I realized that the things that shaped the millennial generation didn't even, he has no memory of, because he was in diapers.
What about I think there's definitely a narrative between Columbine to Parkland, the Parkland shooting.
You know, it's
With,
funny
like, the
because
first Massachusetts being born in 81.
the Columbine thing, when that happened, my oldest was an infant. And, you know, when you have a baby, and I know Ryan's a parent, you become, you're like in this overprotective mode. And I happened to have the news on that day, and I was watching the whole Columbine thing unfolding. And, you know, I'm just like hugging my little baby, and it was terrifying to me. And I remember my mother coming over to my house as soon as she got off work. She'd heard about it. And she said, that baby will never attend private school. He will not, you know, we were just so frightened by that. And, you know, it was really, really, really terrifying for parents to watch that. And from that time on, it's just been, that's the world that my children were raised in.
That's exactly how it felt
Sucks.
watching Sandy Hook. Just,
yeah.
I know it's a different subject, but we just had Josiah and Quincy, my oldest boys, right before Sandy Hook happened.
I remember 1993 as a calendar year, but I couldn't tell you anything important that happened in it. 1994, the O.J. Simpson trial was my first big world memory, you could say, followed by the Oklahoma City bombing, and then the 1996 election and the Atlanta Olympics and bombings bombing that occurred there.
And what's fascinating about that is I'm a weird kid, so I've always been interested in history and aware of life. But I would actually cite those two incidents, like Oklahoma and OJ, and probably Rodney King. I would probably go earliest back to Rodney King, which was 1991 or 1992. What was that?
92.
I would consider those like the first events that I watched with full awareness of what was going on. That's how I would define it. Like, I was always aware of stuff happening. But like when the Berlin Wall happened, I just saw a bunch of like teenagers knocking over a building, and I thought, like, those kids, why are they rejoicing about tearing up a building? You know,
Yeah.
I didn't really get the context, the historical context. I don't remember Challenger either, but I don't think I was in school when that happened.
And see, that's another function of the sort of those later Gen Xers. I mean, they were in school; they got to see Challenger explode in class, and like that's a crazy thing for elementary school kids, you know, to see there.
Do you remember the moon landing? Like, I guess not to make
Ryan, I'm sitting here listening to you guys' first memories, and I'm like, I feel so horrible for the millennials. Because all of their first memories are tragic. I think that my first outside of, playing with my siblings when I was 3 or something like that, my first memory is when I was in first grade. They brought us all in to watch a man landing on the moon. And that was a happy thing, Of course, then we had Watergate a few years down the line, but my first awareness of the world was positive. It wasn't a negative thing that happened. It was a good thing.
Baby Jessica.
That was probably because we had a well.
Yes.
And I wasn't allowed to play near it. And I was like, why? And it's like, this baby's trapped in this well.
I remember Baby Jessica. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's just because I happen to have a well nearby. Like, we didn't have a well nearby. I don't know what my first.
I remember Baby Jessica. I guess technically I could probably count that. I was terrified. I just remember it was on. I think that's like technically one of the first 24/7 news event, right?
I don't know about 24/7, but definitely breaking news and
It's one of those events that Strauss and Howe used to show how the change in parent culture had happened, and this was a new generation and not continuation of Gen X. We were freaking out about a baby trapped down at on the well.
Yeah.
Which dovetails a little bit with like the satanic panic stuff in the early to mid 80s of and which we now have cycled back to the Save Our Children, propaganda stuff too. And so that, I think Baby Jessica played perfectly into that early 80s narrative of something's going to happen to your kids,
Yeah, see, it's really weird to me because the same people that are so concerned about saving our children are the same people that are like, everybody, let's have guns and bring them to school. Because the more guns we have, then the safer our kids are going to be. It's just such a weird psychology.
That's because that whole Save the Children thing is specifically aimed at people that they don't like. Like, only people that the only people they're accusing are people they already, it's purely political propaganda.
Are you talking about Pizzagate and stuff
damage.
like that?
I'm sorry?
Are we talking about Pizzagate and stuff like that?
Yeah. QAnon, all that sort of stuff, yeah.
All of my memories, I kind of missed the 80s because I was in a religious movement. Like I said, parents were gypsies, right? So in the 90s, all of my world memories weren't really world memories, or kind of like traditional American memories, Nancy Kerrigan, the OJ trial. But all of these didn't take me out of, my individualistic chase and, kind of the mode I was in, me. And so, 9/11 was a huge one, and then that's when I started to think about the greater world. I started to think, well, there's people in another country that hate me. Like, what's going on? And I started to really think, bigger picture. But even anything, the race-related things, celebrity-related things, in this country, they fit right into my me perspective, and they didn't shake me. But 9/11 really did.
It's interesting that you have that perspective where 9/11 was the first time you thought that there was people in the world out there to hate us. Because my experience, now I grew up in a household where my parents turned on the nightly news as we watched dinner, and the nightly news was constantly feeding as we were eating. So it might not have been the experience of most people, but I remember just hearing constantly about how, there's these U.S. embassies that are getting blown up all over the place. Then there was, of course, the failed attempt with the World Trade Center and
USS Cole.
And I was like, wow, they really don't like us outside of the U.S. And so I just grew up with that kind of. So 9/11, by the time it happened, it didn't really surprise me because it was sort of like, well, we've been building up to this, haven't we?
What about the rest of you guys? Did you feel growing up like there was foreign enemies?
Oh, the Soviets.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I'm sitting here going, my God, I was raised in the Cold War, and I was ready to die in a nuclear bomb any day. So
yeah, I think. Well, obviously, growing up in the South, growing up in rural North Carolina, where the town had welcome to Smithfield, the KKK welcomes you to Smithfield, help fight communism and integration. There was a billboard that said that until about 1980 or so. So I think there was a little bit of that kind of hangover kind of stuff in the rural South. Because I feel like looking back at various news things and just entertainment too. You look at the Soviet menace isn't such a menace considered in the 80s, especially towards the end of the Soviet Union there. It's kind of a joke about everything's falling apart over there, and
Mr. P, Captain Planet.
All the sitcoms have an episode where a guy's trying to defect, usually a chess player, and so yeah.
That's from the 70s. That's a reference to the 70s there.
The 70s and some 80s. There's some 80s ones too. It was basically like, the Russians were our enemy.
Was anybody old enough to have the Princess Diana really affect them? I didn't.
Oh, yes.
Really,
yes.
I mean,
it's
knowledgeable but not effective. Yeah.
My mother
I was more
a big
Mother Teresa
Diana
guy.
fan.
It affected me only because I think I did identify with the age with Prince William. I think he was born in '82, so and Diana was, I felt like, around the same age as my mom. So that relationship, I remember those images of those two, seeing that over the years. And so it did affect me in a mother-son type of way. Yeah.
Did you 80s born guys, were you, when you were growing up, because you would have been mostly in grade school, were you even aware of the AIDS epidemic or anything about that when you were little, or was that just
Salt and pepper. Let's talk about sex. That's about it. That was my awareness of it. And MTV campaigns. Wrap it up.
So you guys kind of learned about AIDS as a historical event almost, because
the movie Philadelphia.
I know that generations are supposed to be 20 years, but as much as the rapid pace of technology, I think, especially because we've gone through such massive change in the last few decades, that I think that's really does matter when you're looking at the different generations. And
Exactly.
Broadly. I still say broadly.
Because, growing up in rural North Carolina, I didn't have cable until I was 10 years old. You know what I mean? So you're looking at 1992. So, I missed all of the 80s cable boom, like MTV and that sort of stuff like that, until MTV was established. And I think for so many generations, where you are is also gives a different perspective. If you're 16 years old in rural Alabama in 1968, you've got a different experience than being in San Francisco in 1968.
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Granted, growing up in rural North Carolina versus growing up in Chicago, it as a millennial, completely different experience.
Completely.
Ryan and I grew up 50 miles apart, and I often, through the years, have said a lot of the things that he described as being markings of, I'm part of this new thing. I was like, yeah, that was only starting to filter into our area for the class behind me, kind of thing.
Well, see, and when Chaz was talking about his parents having the nightly news on every night at dinner, I felt like I needed to defend them. And this has to do with, generations and technology, I guess. But you do realize that in the world that they grew up in, you had a half hour where you could find out what happened that day. And that was it.
Yeah.
And my parents actually grew up in a world where television stayed off at mealtime.
But see, it was right there, and that was your only window. That was it. That half hour. So of course everyone tuned in, and we only had 3 news channels, so we all heard the same news, and generally everyone watched CBS and
ABC.
Okay, well your parents were just weird then.
We watched CBS.
It was CBS all the way. Young and the Restless. Everything about CBS.
Yeah, I
ABC News.
Price is Right.
Price is Right. Yep.
Well, no, see, my uncle was one of the main reporters on CBS Evening News, so we had to watch CBS.
Can I throw something at the group? And also, Amy, I want to. I never heard what you thought of the Princess Diana being slightly older than us. My question is, what do you think about this way to define an Exer versus a millennial? An Exer is somebody that willingly listened to the boomers when they said, hey, follow me and you'll be regional manager, you'll be district manager. And the Exer was like, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, and was kind of the understudy and was okay with that. Like, I'm going to win at this. One day, these boomers are going to let me in and have a seat. And then the millennial is someone that says, wait a minute, I see the Exer trying really, really hard and he's never getting in. And the millennial's like, no, we're going to play the game differently. Like, what do you think about that way to divide Exer versus millennial?
That's good. That's actually pretty good.
Yeah, I do think that the Xers, especially the 60s born Xers, my gosh, just put them with the boomers at this point. Just put them with them.
They're mini boomers. They're mini boomers.
Because you know what? They just followed them hook, line, and sinker. And I just really don't see any real difference between them and the boomers. I mean, especially now we're all old together, but even when we were younger, I just don't, especially, you know,
the gap
after
that used to exist has been getting narrower and narrower and narrower.
Well, yeah, and maybe with the early boomers when they were, you know, doing their Happy Days sock hop stuff, okay, we weren't like that.
Wait a minute, Amy. If I said some words, if I said like pit bull mom, when I say pit bull mom, or like, you're not gonna think boomer, that's Exer, right? Or like woman with like highlights and tattoos, arm sleeves, that's an Exer, right? That's not a boomer. Like that seems specific to Exers.
Yeah, but is that really the typical 60s Exer though? That's the thing. That's the 70s Exer.
I think somebody born like 1972. Mom.
Yeah. I mean, because I think the Exer that you're describing is
the cores,
the cores and the younger ones. I'm talking about the older Exers, and
well, I'm describing the Exers that I know.
Okay. Okay. Well, you know what? I am a hover mother, and yeah, you better not mess with my kids, but you better not mess with any of my people. You know, I mean, I get protective of, you know, like Chaz and Ryan and you know, my friends. So I don't know that's, you know. But no, I don't think of the 60s Xers as having tattoos all over their bodies.
While we're talking about Exers, see, my big issue with Xennial or Xennial, whatever it's called, is that I think it cheats Exers. I think the Gen X dates are already small, and Strauss and Howe define an Exer between 1961 and 81. But Pew Research and majority of the other demographers, they used to say 65 to 80. It's already a small micro generation.
And I think
so
it really
Xennial just cuts it off. And
I think that 65 to 80 is probably accurate. And if you go by Pew's dates for the millennials, isn't that about a 15 year generation too?
Yeah, I'm still not sold on 96, but
But you know what? But maybe that's what our generations are now, because of the advancement in technology. Maybe they don't last 20 years. Maybe they really only last.
Hold on. I gotta push back on that, because the technology goes very fast. So like, you could say that the whole era of the 50s was a meme, right? You can picture the 50s with the neat furniture, the light blue furniture. The 60s was a meme, and it does speed up as you get into the early 00s. Everything's a meme, but the mood still moves slow. Like, it's hard to shift a mood. A mood is more like a cruise ship, while, you know, the memes might be like a speedboat, you know, but the mood changes slowly.
Good.
So
what you're getting into is like talking about the difference between like pop culture and then like, social mood, and that's something that Ryan and I used to talk about a little bit on way back a few years ago.
Right.
Where we would say like, oh, there seems like there's some differences between pop culture generations and the Strauss and Howe stuff.
It's pretty self-explanatory. It's just the people who make the pop culture for that generation are actually the generation before.
Right. John
Hughes
for
Exers. It's a combination of aesthetics and commercialism, you know. I'm
Which
hesitant.
is why I could never trace pop culture generations before the 1920s.
Right.
blues culture
Speaking
started
of,
before then.
Well,
speaking
but
of
also,
pop culture,
well,
I
you know why you can't is because teenagers didn't exist before then.
Right.
I feel like I have spent my whole life in the boomer world, you know, in the shadow of what their culture, everything. And I wonder, for you guys, do you feel that way about the Xers or not? I mean,
I
because
think
all
we're
of
still
the
in the Exer world. I do. I think we're still playing by their playbook. Okay, Madonna was a Joneser. Madonna, Michael Jackson were Jonesers, but I believe that they entertained the Xers. And I believe our entertainers are still playing. We just like Ariana Grande is nothing but Mariah Carey, 2010s style. Where, you know, I think they're still playing by that.
Well, I do think
Concerts will
to
be
go
seen.
back to there was some posts and discussion about this going back to like that whole 1920s comparison. I do think that they formulated some archetypes around that era, and they just every 10 years they get a new coat of paint with new kind of people to fill those archetypes. Whether it's the good girl pretending to be naughty kind of thing that Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera fell into around our age, or you're talking about people who are falling into the different things. You've talked about the comparisons between Billie Holiday and I think Ariana Grande, if I remember correctly. Or am I
Mumble rap seems to be
Rihanna? I'm mixing up people in my head, but it even gets down to the point where they titled songs similarly. I've often thrown out I want to be bad as a song lyric that just keeps coming back and back and back.
the sex kitten. The
For the sex kitten as an archetype.
It seems like the only thing that's disrupting Exer culture now is Corona and mumble rap. I'll explain. The coronavirus is disrupting things like the franchise, the movie franchise, the blockbusters that we grew up in the 80s and the 90s. Mumble rap seems to be the only thing that really offends people who grew up with 90s, 80s, and 90s rap. Like, they're offended. Oh, it's skinny jeans. That seems to really offend Xers. That really offends Xers.
which is weird because I kind of like the skinny jeans, but they work well for me because of my body type. We've talked about this. Skinny jeans do not work well for a lot of people's body types. So
apparently they offend Gen Z too now, skinny jeans. So I guess we can probably count skinny jeans or slim jeans as something that may be millennial. Like that.
Hey, all right, now I got a question for you guys. How many of you wore acid wash jeans in the 90s? Did you wear that when you were kids?
No.
Do you remember acid wash jeans at all?
No.
I think so, yeah.
Kinda.
I mean, maybe my mom put them on me, but not by choice.
Well, at least your mom didn't force you into corduroys.
Dark blue denim was pretty big in the late 90s.
But see, I think corduroys is a hangover from the late 70s kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so, a little bit.
And so, I mean, I had corduroys growing up and overalls.
I had overalls.
You know, which I think is a sort of holdover from those sort of late 70s.
Which tells you when my mother's tastes were popular among parents, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So now I'm having I want you all to take a shot at this because I want to hear all your responses. So we've discussed Exer culture. So just tell me what millennial culture is. How would you describe it?
Hipsters?
I would say it's burdened. It is a culture of burden, of debt, of societal expectations, family expectations. I think if the past 20 years had seen the millennials get paid, we'd have this video would be happening right now, because for so many millennials, they've either had to put off or completely abandon a lot of the milestones of their parents or the Xers. You know, that's like I talked about earlier about, like, you know, a kind of age, a term for being not yet settled. So many people are just not yet settled. They're still in apartments. They maybe want a house, can't afford it. They want a family, can't afford to start one. And it's a multifaceted problem. You know, it's wages, it's healthcare, It's the job market. It's societal kind of safety net sort of stuff. Daycare, all kinds of different aspects that for the past 20 to 25 years, the boomers especially just said, nah, we got ours and we're not going to really help you any.
And Exers had to make up a little bit of it, but not as much as they got to the point where Millennials are.
Right, and so
I will recognize that Exers had some burdens, but it's like every year the burden got a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger.
But the main thing is the Millennials graduated college right into the Great Recession, you know, and they've just never really been able to catch up, you know. I mean, this isn't a broad brush because I mean, obviously, yes, some people out there have houses, have families, that sort of stuff like that. Probably not on the timetable they expected. And their future isn't really what maybe they expected it was going to be as well. And it's certainly not the future of their future is not going to be similar to the retirement age kind of activities of their parents. They're not going to invite over Stan and Barb to admire the new patio, you know what I mean? Because they're still going to be in an apartment because housing prices are still, you know, out of control. So I think
I'm one of the people with a house, but I have no idea how my retirement's going to look.
I remember
Millennials,
people,
I think their retirement plans are based off societal collapse. So we'll see. But ultimately, I think the basic Exer or the millennial experience is one of burden and adaptation to some degree. Because I feel like I think they're adapting to the burdens. I don't know if necessarily the burdens are coming to them because of them. I think they're adapting to it. For example, millennials notoriously are more interested in experiences than owning things. They much rather, you know, go see, you know, some waterfall, go hike and see waterfalls than to buy, you know, new TVs or this, that, and the other. You know, they're not so interested in owning a DVD collection or Blu-ray collection. They'll just, you know, rent it online. Don't need to own it. So I think it's a culture of adaptation to the hardship.
I remember when I used to hear all of these critiques about millennials, I thought they were talking about me. Like, you know, when they were talking about people with like avocado toast, I'm like, well, shit, I like avocado toast, right? So like, I thought they were talking about me. And the first time I realized that millennials were their own thing is when I started to see memes. And, you know, I was used to, you know, the graphics always had to be better, right? So the Super Nintendo had to be better than regular Nintendo. And the production value always had to get better. And then I realized that there was an entire generation of people that would make their memes with like Microsoft Paint and it looked bad. And then when they told a joke, the jokes were awkward, and like the more stuttery the joke was and the more awkward it was delivered, the better. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not my thing. Like I'm used to, you know, like, you know, Dave Chappelle can really tell a joke and the punchline's perfect. And, you know, I like everything 4K and the quality good. Then I realized there was this whole other generation that didn't care about any of that. Like the worse the editing was, the more authentic it was.
I think they like the retro aesthetic, you know, like the 90s VHS aesthetic on TikTok. That's huge. But I think there's also the idea that it's supposed to be bad. It's supposed to be hokey. It's supposed to be amateurish. I don't know why, but that's
it's also a little bit easier when you have low expectations.
Yeah.
To add to your point earlier, Adam, about delaying milestones and such, it's now starting to affect, well, what Strauss and Howe would call the childcare industry, where all of a sudden, since millennials have put off having children, the effects are starting to affect industries that would cater towards people having children, and with the assumption that, oh, there's always going to be more children. And no, there aren't going to be more children. So the growth plans and such are starting to be affected. I work for the Boy Scouts of America, and there is a plethora of units in my area that I service, 60, and it's only going to start shrinking over the next several years and condensing, because what serviced people my age when there was a whole bunch of kids running around now isn't going to at all as we get a smaller and smaller generation. So that sense of burden is now starting to move up and affect not just millennials, but Gen Xers who are in charge of those child rearing industries.
So do you think amusement parks and stuff like that are amusement parks and things like that on their way out?
I'd say that you're going to at least get us condensed into at least the more high quality ones. Like I already grew up in the era where the abandoned amusement park with the broken glass of, the maze of mirrors was a thing that I could go and explore if I wanted to. So that was already starting with my age.
I remember one of my favorite times as far as amusement park was going to Universal Studios, and we always had speed passes because we had family in Florida, and it was like the best thing for me, and it was like it captured my imagination because if you were in Dr. Seuss land, even a trash can where you throw your fountain drink out would look like a Dr. Seuss trash can. So like everything was all inclusive. And I've been telling, I have a 7-year-old and a 17-year-old. I went to Universal Studios with my 17-year-old, but not my 7-year-old, and he's always wanted to go. And one day I plan on taking him. But we also do virtual reality, and I'm starting to realize, like, by the time I get him there, he might be disappointed because, like, in VR, like, not only is the trash can Dr. Seuss, but the damn sky is, and so is it's just like it's one step further than the trash can is also Dr. Seuss themed.
Oh wow, that's a good point.
Mm.
I think, Chaz, also to follow up your point on the child care contraction, industry contraction, I think what we're going to see in the future, in the next 10, 15, 20 years, on the opposite end is elder care. As, the millennials are expected to help take care of their aging parents. They're going to find out, hey, they don't have the money to do that. They don't have the time to do that. They don't live near there. So I think, unfortunately, I think that's what's going to cause a reckoning with the sort of whole fixing the economy kind of thing to be equitable to everyone, is because, hey, we're going to have a lot of senior citizens that are going to be tough luck,
And speaking as someone who had to take care of their parents as they were aging towards that and are now both dead, it's not a fun time. So,
and you know what? I think that reality is going to hit the younger millennials and Gen Z more than the older millennials, because basically the ones that have Exer parents, because while Exers have made it through life, reaching those adult milestones that the millennials are just having trouble reaching at all because of the economy. They've survived, they've paid the bills, but I just don't think that they're gonna have the money to move to retirement centers and things like that. I mean, it's really gonna whereas the older millennials, got the boomer parents who are they're better off. I mean, on the whole, obviously
they're spending all that money on them now. They're not really. I'm very, very, very much aware that there are boomers out there who are not rich, who are struggling. I realize that, so I'm making generalizations, but I really think that's going to be a bigger problem for the people at the people born
end of the millennials.
People born in the 90s, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and the Zers, the people who have Exer parents.
And keep in mind, there has to be a lot of boomers that really got involved with the birth control and the feminist movement and don't have kids. We're going to see a whole horde of elderly women that have no kids.
Yeah. They're already there.
There you
go. Last time we had a whole.
They're already there.
There were 2 times in history we had a whole horde of elderly women without kids. One was with the lost generation, especially over in England, after all the men went off and died. And we can probably research and find out what happened to them. But the next one that I really want to mention is when you had basically, after the English Civil War, there was a whole generation of women who just grew old because they couldn't marry, they couldn't have kids, and we went and burned them as witches.
Oh, God.
Well, we've got I have one boomer aunt, and my husband has one boomer aunt that never had children, and it's like, and especially with my husband's boomer aunt, it's like we're all she's got, and so yeah, I mean, I've got two right, you know, in my family. My boomer aunt, I don't know. I may have to take both the aunts in. I don't know, but they're there, and I know lots of boomer women that they may have got married, but they got divorced, so they're not coupled, you know, or they're widows or whatever. So I think that's already the reality.
Amy, I wanna bring it back to, because I wanna get Tommy's response to your question, like how do we define millennials?
Yeah.
I wanna,
Yeah.
I'm
We
gonna jump
didn't
in
have.
and say, I see millennials. Let's forget about the name millennial. Call us Gen Y. I don't know. Call us whatever. But the people born in the 80s and half of the 90s, I do see us as basically a transitional generation. I mean, even though, you know, the 90s kids had had iPhones, I just, you know, we talk about change of technology, but I still see it as like just upgrades. Like you mentioned video game systems. It's just like we had Super Nintendo and they just had PlayStation. It's just an upgrade of the same principle, the same thing. You know, social. We had AOL chat, and now they have, you know, Vine and TikTok. Vine doesn't exist, but I'm talking about
WhatsApp.
I'm talking about 90s millennials. You know, in the mid 2000s, they had Vine.
But Ryan, as an archetype though, do you still feel like they sync up with the GI hero archetype?
See, as far as Strauss and Howe, I don't know what to think with that.
Well,
I mean, AOC is.
I think we're civic, but there's a lot of nomad in us too, which is why Chaz and I guess we can set this up. Chaz and I, we developed a fifth archetype called the rogue, and so that the rogue has a little bit of civic, and it's a transitional generation. And it's not a micro generation. It's not just a cusp. It's a full generation, and we call them the rogue.
and there's a previous example, but if you look at the fact that Strauss and Howe defined the GI generation as this large, long thing, but you also have the competing definition from Tom Brokaw of, well, you can split that in half actually, because you had the interbellums who grew up in like the 1 foot in the 19th century and then come of age as everything's changing over into the 20th century kind of thing. And then you have the younger half, which grew up as children in the 20s and the Great Depression immediately after, and then went off and fought in World War II. And then while World War II did bring them together with, say, the interbellums as like the younger side of the generals and middle management staff, and the younger half of like the GIs as like the foot soldiers and such, there was still that cultural distinction where you even see it among a lot of those interbellum creators. When they would return to a nostalgic, oh, why can't it be 1912 anymore?
Let me get you guys' vote. Bart Simpson, Exer or Millennial?
I think he's transitional, just like us. I think without a doubt, like Mickey Mouse was very nomadic. Mickey Mouse was a nomad. Bart was a nomad. The first couple years, 100% nomad. But
Lisa, everyone can agree that Lisa Simpson's a millennial, right?
Yeah, Lisa's a millennial.
Yes. But I also think that dynamic of a more nomadic boy and a more civic good girl was very common among millennials for years in the 80s.
I think most millennial guys, even born in the 90s, have a little bit nomad flair to them. I don't really think the Strauss.
I think it's because millennial guys never really reinvented a millennial good boy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, this is just my observation as an outsider, and so looking in, so I could be very wrong, and correct me if I am. And it's okay. I can be wrong. When I look at the millennials, I think, damn, it's too bad that the title of the lost generation was already taken, because that's really how I see the millennials. I feel like, and I'm not saying that they have the exact same characteristics as the actual lost generation. I'm just saying the title fits them.
Right. They actually tried to rebrand us in 2008 as a lost generation. There was that poem that you could read backwards and forwards. I'm sure everyone's seen that.
Well, you know, I'm listening to what Adam is saying, and I said describe the millennial culture, and he's basically saying we're a generation of have-nots who, you know, can't haven't been able, not through any fault of your own, but just the situation of our world as it is.
And even more tragic is that we were sold on the possibilities of the future.
I know.
You know,
I know.
especially being the class of 2000, it was like, oh, you can be anything you want. You can do anything. And I think a lot of that, and part of the reason why I think we're in such a bind is sort of choice paralysis, where it's like, well, I could be a lawyer, or I could be a marine biologist, or you know what, I think I would really maybe like to be a vet. You know, and so you spent your college years dabbling in a little bit of everything, ultimately ending up with nothing, and sort of settling in on some just steady, you know, 9-to-5 office job.
And that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I feel like, you know, if the millennial culture is just wandering around the wilderness, going from gig job to gig job, that's your culture. You know, that's lost to me. And then there's
more nomad than Exer.
and then there's the other part of the millennial generation that gets talked about in the news, but not so much is a part of the millennial, you know, this being a millennial thing. I'm aware of it because I come from rural areas of the country, and I know about, you know, the group of millennials, and I wish it was a small little tiny subset, but it's not, who have, you know, addiction problems, dying of overdose, and I think that is a result of that culture that Adam talked about.
And to add on to this point, I've been thinking about this the entire time. Think of the movie A Streetcar Named Desire, where you have those neighbors who are a little bit older than the Kowalskis. The Kowalski, with Stan Kowalski being a World War II veteran of like the 1920s era kind of cohort. But their neighbors upstairs were born like 12 years before them and are childless. They're always getting drunk and getting into arguments with one another, and they're living a very miserable life. And you kind of get the feeling that they feel like their life was promised to be better, but it's not, and they're stuck in this little cramped apartment above.
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Mm-hmm.
Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and I think our modern day version of that is Malcolm and Marie. It just came out on Netflix. We should probably do an episode on that. It's the same dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the millennial culture, or is there more to it than that?
I don't know, man. I feel like I'm still kind of optimistic. I think that's millennial too, to still be optimistic, even though we're living through the crap. Somehow it still feels like something.
Somehow the crap will turn into gold.
I just feel like, I don't know.
The millennial story is still being written, and you know, if they're getting picked on from the seniors, and as Ryan said, now the Zers, like, you know, pressure makes diamonds. And one thing I see in the millennial culture that I didn't see in my Molexer culture is you see millennial couples taking a van and turning it into you know, a conversion van, and I'm just like, I can't think of a damn Exer girlfriend that would have been okay with that. Like, she was like, motherfucker, we're doing what? You know, excuse my language. But, you know, it's like they wouldn't have been okay with that. Like, you need to get us better. And there's something about the humbleness about, okay, you know, like, I know you're trying hard, and this is all we can do, and this is what we'll do. And there's something kind of beautiful about that. And, you know, kudos to that.